Times Square was ablaze with its usual chaos when a blinding light pierced the sky, silencing the city's roar. A sleek, metallic UFO hovered above, its surface pulsating with an otherworldly glow. Pedestrians froze mid-motion, some in awe, others in terror. Then, like a wave, they all stopped moving, frozen as if time itself had bent to the ship's will. Among the immobilized crowd, one man stood untouched, his heart pounding as the craft turned its gaze solely on him. The late summer air was thick with the energy of New York City, a chaotic symphony of blaring horns, street performers, and the constant hum of conversation. Times Square, in all its neon glory, stood as the epicenter of the city's vibrant pulse. Among the throngs of tourists and locals, Alex Carter stood with his camera slung over one shoulder. He wasn't here by choice. His editor had sent him to capture the spirit of the city, a vague assignment he loathed. He'd rather be chasing real stories, not snapping photos of tourists gawking at oversized billboards. Alex leaned against a lamppost, adjusting the settings on his camera. A street performer in a metallic silver suit was entertaining a small crowd nearby, pretending to be a robot. He glanced around, looking for something, anything, worth capturing. His instincts, honed by years as a photojournalist, told him that something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the air carried an unusual weight, a tension that didn't belong in the usual chaos of Times Square. And then it happened. A piercing light erupted from the sky, so bright that it drowned out the garish glow of the billboards. The crowd collectively gasped, and for a moment, the city that never sleeps held its breath. Alex instinctively raised his camera, snapping photos as the light intensified. A sleek, metallic object descended from the heavens, its surface smooth and reflective, as if it were a piece of liquid mercury frozen mid-flow. It hovered silently above Times Square, casting an eerie silver light that painted everything in an otherworldly hue. "Is this some kind of stunt?" someone in the crowd muttered. Others pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle with shaky hands. But Alex knew this was no publicity stunt. He felt it in his gut, the same gut that had led him to uncover stories others missed. He continued snapping photos, his hands trembling slightly. The UFO, because there was no other word for it, hovered about 100 feet above the ground, completely silent. Its surface seemed to ripple like water, reflecting distorted images of the awestruck crowd below. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light intensified once more. Alex shielded his eyes, but he could still feel its intensity, like the sun was just inches away. A low hum began to resonate, growing louder and deeper until it was a physical force pressing against his chest. The crowd around him froze, not in fear or awe, but literally froze. A woman mid-scream, her face locked in terror. A man reaching for his phone, his hand suspended in mid-air. The street performer, his metallic costume glinting in the UFO's light, stood completely still, his robotic pose now unnervingly real. Alex looked around, his heart pounding. "What the hell?" he muttered. He reached out to the man next to him, shaking his shoulder. No response. The man didn't even blink. Panic surged through Alex as he moved through the crowd, shouting, shaking, even slapping people in a desperate attempt to get a reaction. Nothing. Everyone was frozen, their expressions fixed, their bodies unnaturally still. Everyone except Alex. He stumbled back, his mind racing. Why was he the only one unaffected? What was happening? The UFO seemed to notice him, or at least that's how it felt. Its reflective surface shifted, and for a brief moment, Alex saw his own face staring back at him, distorted and stretched. The hum grew louder, vibrating through his skull, and Alex fell to his knees, clutching his head. And then, silence. The light vanished and the UFO shot into the sky faster than Alex could comprehend. The crowd began to move again as if nothing had happened. The woman finished her scream, the man pulled out his phone, and the street performer resumed his robotic dance. They all moved as if no time had passed, completely unaware of what had just occurred. Alex sat on the pavement, his breath ragged. He looked around, expecting someone to acknowledge the event, to question what had just happened. But the world continued as normal. A couple walked by, laughing and pointing at a nearby billboard. A group of teenagers snapped selfies in front of a costume superhero. The moment was gone, erased from everyone's memory, everyone except Alex. He scrambled to his feet, gripping his camera like a lifeline. He reviewed the photos he'd taken, hoping for some proof, some evidence that he hadn't imagined it. The first few images were of the crowd, the street performer, the usual chaos of Times Square, and then there it was, the UFO, its metallic surface glowing against the night sky. The photos were blurry, but they were real. He hadn't imagined it. Alex's hands shook as he scrolled through the images. He knew what he had just witnessed was the story of a lifetime, but he also knew that no one would believe him. Not without more proof. He had to find out what had happened, why everyone had frozen, and why he had been spared. The questions swirled in his mind, each more terrifying than the last. As Alex walked away from Times Square, his camera slung over his shoulder, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but the crowd was just as it had always been. Loud, chaotic, and oblivious. Yet, deep down, he knew that whatever had happened wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Alex didn't go straight home after the incident. Instead, he wandered aimlessly, clutching his camera like a lifeline. His mind replayed the events in a loop, the UFO, the frozen crowd, and the hum that had burrowed into his skull. He needed answers, but where would he even begin? He decided to head to a nearby diner, a quiet place he often frequented when chasing deadlines. It was open late and, more importantly, had Wi-Fi. The waitress, Maria, greeted him with a warm smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, sliding a menu toward him. Alex forced a smile. "Something like that. Just coffee, please." Maria nodded and left him alone. Alex pulled out his laptop, fingers trembling as he typed UFO Times Square into the search bar. Nothing came up, no social media posts, no news articles, nothing hinting at the event he'd just witnessed. He frowned, refreshing the page. How could something in the middle of one of the busiest places on Earth go completely unnoticed? He glanced at his camera. The photos were his only proof. Connecting it to his laptop, he leaned forward, scrutinizing every detail. The UFO was there, unmistakable, but something else caught his eye. In one photo, just as the light intensified, the air around the ship appeared distorted. It wasn't just light, it was as if reality itself had warped. A chill ran down his spine. What the hell was this thing? As he stared, a low, imperceptible hum filled his ears. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a lingering echo from the incident. But it grew louder, distinct. It wasn't random. It was a sequence of tones, deliberate and purposeful. Alex glanced around the diner, but no one else seemed to notice. The hum was meant for him. "Do you hear that?" he asked Maria as she refilled his coffee. She raised an eyebrow. "Hear what?" Alex shook his head. "Never mind." The hum persisted, and with it came a strange sensation, a faint tug at his consciousness. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was unnerving. Closing his eyes, he focused on the sound. The tones repeated, forming a sequence. A code? A message? He had no idea, but the urge to decipher it was overwhelming. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his trance. It was a notification. Unusual phenomena reported across New York City. Clicking the link, his heart raced. The article mentioned strange power outages, unexplained lights in the sky, and interruptions in communications. It wasn't just Times Square. Something bigger was happening. The hum grew louder, urgent. Alex felt a compulsion to leave, as if an invisible force was guiding him. Tossing cash on the counter, he hurried outside, ignoring Maria's concerned glance. The streets were quieter now, the usual bustle replaced by a strange stillness. The hum pulled him west, toward the Hudson River. Alex followed, his feet moving of their own accord. The sound intensified with each step, and flashes of images filled his mind. Stars, galaxies, and a dark, endless void. He stumbled, gripping a lamppost for support. The vision overwhelmed him, like his brain was struggling to process something beyond comprehension. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The hum softened, almost soothing. Alex took a deep breath and kept walking. He found himself at the river's edge where city lights reflected off dark water. The hum was deafening now, resonating in his bones. Then it stopped. The silence was so abrupt it felt unnatural. Alex looked around, his heart pounding. The water was unnaturally still, the air heavy with anticipation. He felt a presence, something unseen, yet undeniably there. Raising his camera, he captured only the empty riverbank, but deep down he knew he wasn't alone. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. No number, no contact, just a single line. "You've been chosen." Alex's breath caught. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. Chosen for what? He typed a reply, "Who is this?" and hit send. The message failed to deliver. He tried again, same result. Frustrated, he shoved the phone back into his pocket and turned his attention to the river. That's when he saw it. A faint ripple in the water, moving against the current. It grew stronger, spreading outward in perfect circles. From the disturbance, a small metallic sphere emerged. Hovering just above the surface, its smooth, glowing surface reflected the moonlight. Alex took a cautious step closer, his camera still in hand. The sphere pulsed with light, and the hum returned, softer now. Alex felt calm wash over him, as if the sphere was communicating. He raised his hand, hesitating before reaching out. The sphere moved toward him until it was inches away. He saw his reflection in its shimmering surface. And then it spoke, not in words, but in thoughts. Images, emotions, and concepts flooded Alex's mind. He saw distant worlds, advanced civilizations, and a warning. Something dark, something dangerous, was heading for Earth. The message was clear. Alex had a role to play, though what that was remained a mystery. The sphere pulsed once more before shooting into the sky, disappearing instantly. Alex stood there, trembling. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. And, for better or worse, he was part of it now. The next morning, Alex awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. He had barely slept after the events of the previous night, his mind spinning with questions and half-formed theories. As he groggily reached for the phone, his stomach twisted. He half expected another cryptic message, but it was just his editor. "Carter, where are the shots from Times Square? Don't tell me you blew this off," the voice barked before Alex could even say hello. "I got the shots," Alex replied, rubbing his eyes. "But listen, something happened. It's bigger than a crowd shot or tourist photos. Something otherworldly." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a disbelieving laugh. "Don't start with your conspiracy crap again. Just get me those photos." Before Alex could argue, the call ended. He stared at the phone, frustration bubbling beneath his skin. No one would believe him. Not his editor, not the public. He'd have to investigate this alone. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint return of the hum. It was softer now, less urgent than before, but it was unmistakable. Alex froze, his hand hovering over his laptop. The sound seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once, filling the small apartment with its strange resonance. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like a presence. Compelled by an inexplicable force, Alex grabbed his camera and jacket. He didn't know where he was going, but the hum guided him, pulling him toward something he couldn't define. He stepped out into the bustling city, where life carried on as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. The hum led him east, away from the chaos of Midtown and toward the quieter industrial edges of the city. As he walked, flashes of images and emotions flickered through his mind again. He saw stars, alien worlds, and a dark, looming shadow, something massive and incomprehensible, stretching across the cosmos like a predator hunting its prey. The images weren't his own. They were being shown to him, placed in his mind by something else. The message was clear. Time was running out. After nearly an hour of walking, Alex found himself in an abandoned warehouse near the docks. The hum had grown louder, vibrating through his skull and chest like a heartbeat. The building was decrepit, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Yet Alex felt drawn to it, as if it were the epicenter of the strange phenomena. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust and decay. Shafts of light streamed through broken windows, illuminating the dusty floor. At first glance, the warehouse appeared empty, but Alex knew better. He could feel it. Something was here, waiting. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The hum stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Alex's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he scanned the room, his fingers tightening around his camera. And then he saw it. A figure stood in the shadows, its outline barely discernible against the dim light. It was tall, unnaturally so, with a fluid, almost shifting form that defied logic. As it stepped into the light, Alex's breath caught. The being was humanoid but not human. Its skin shimmered like polished obsidian, and its eyes glowed faintly with an otherworldly blue light. It was both beautiful and terrifying. The being raised a hand, and Alex felt an invisible force grip him. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His mind raced with panic, but the being's gaze held him in place. Then, without a word, it began to communicate. Not with sounds, but with thoughts. Images, emotions, and concepts flooded Alex's mind, overwhelming him with their intensity. He saw glimpses of a dying world, its skies darkened by war and destruction. He felt the anguish of an entire civilization on the brink of extinction. And he understood, with terrifying clarity, that the same fate awaited Earth if something wasn't done. "Why me?" Alex thought, his inner voice trembling with fear and confusion. The being's response was simple but profound. "You are the bridge." Before Alex could process the words, the being extended its hand toward him. A small, glowing object materialized in its palm, hovering just above its surface. It was a disk, no larger than a coin, inscribed with intricate glowing symbols that seemed to shift and change as Alex stared at them. The being stepped closer, holding the object out to him. Alex hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run, but he couldn't. He reached out, his hand trembling, and took the disk. The moment his fingers touched it, a surge of energy shot through him, and the warehouse vanished. Alex found himself standing in a void, surrounded by stars and galaxies. The being stood beside him, its presence both comforting and overwhelming. In this place, words seemed unnecessary. Alex understood that he was being shown something important. A crossroads, a choice that would determine the future of not just Earth, but countless other worlds. As the vision faded, Alex found himself back in the warehouse, the disk still in his hand. The being was gone, leaving only the faint hum in the air. Alex stared at the object, its symbols still shifting and glowing. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. He had been chosen, and now he had to figure out why. The disk hadn't stopped glowing since Alex left the warehouse. Every so often, the symbols on its surface rearranged themselves, forming new patterns that seemed tantalizingly close to meaning something. But what? Alex had no idea. He'd spent hours studying it in his small apartment, turning it over in his hands, snapping photos, even trying to upload them to his laptop. Each time, the images on his screen appeared scrambled, corrupted. Whatever this thing was, it defied every tool he had to analyze it. By midday, Alex felt his paranoia growing. The sensation of being watched had returned, stronger than before. At first, he chalked it up to exhaustion, but the feeling wouldn't leave him. Every time he glanced out his window, he swore he saw a dark car idling near his building. When he went outside to check, it was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Something was wrong. Alex knew better than to dismiss his instincts. He packed a small bag with essentials, his camera, the disc, and his laptop, and left his apartment, blending into the bustling crowd outside. He had to stay ahead of whatever was happening. He didn't trust the authorities to have his best interests at heart. If the government knew about the disc, they'd take it from him without hesitation. He made his way to a friend's studio in Brooklyn, a cramped, cluttered space where old radio equipment and vintage computers lined the walls. Eli, a former journalist turned conspiracy theorist, greeted him with a wary look. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Eli said, his hands buried in a tangle of wires. "Something like that," Alex replied, setting the disc on the desk. "I need your help." Eli leaned closer, his expression shifting from skepticism to fascination. "What is this? Some kind of artifact?" Alex hesitated, debating how much to reveal. "I don't know. It came from someone, or something. I need to figure out what it is, and fast." Eli nodded, his fingers already moving to hook the disc up to a piece of equipment. "You're in luck. I've been working on a signal decoder. If this thing emits anything, I'll pick it up." As Eli worked, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The studio's windows were covered with thick curtains, but it didn't matter. The sense of an unseen presence pressed down on him like a weight. He checked his phone out of habit, only to find it unresponsive. No signal, no Wi-Fi, just a blank, flickering screen. "Something's wrong," Alex muttered, pacing the room. Before Eli could respond, the faint hum returned. This time, it wasn't coming from the disc. It was outside, low, rhythmic, and growing louder. Alex moved to the door, his pulse racing. Through the peephole, he saw a black SUV idling across the street. Men in suits stepped out, their movements purposeful and coordinated. They weren't here by accident. "Eli, we've got company," Alex hissed, locking the door. Eli glanced up from his work, his face pale. "How the hell did they find us?" "I don't know, but we need to go. Now." Before they could act, the door shook violently. Someone was trying to force their way in. Alex grabbed the disc, stuffing it into his bag. Eli scrambled to gather his equipment, but there wasn't time. The door splintered, and 3 men in tactical gear stormed inside, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one of them barked, his voice cold and authoritative. Alex raised his hands, his mind racing. The disc in his bag seemed to hum faintly, as if reacting to the tension. One of the men grabbed Eli, forcing him to the ground. The other 2 advanced on Alex, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of the object they were clearly after. "We know you have it," one of them said, his tone edged with menace. "Give it to us, and no one gets hurt." Alex's grip on the bag tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man stepped closer, his patience thinning. "Don't play games. We've been tracking you since Times Square. Hand it over." Eli, still pinned to the floor, shouted, "Don't give it to them, Alex. They're not who they say they are." The words barely registered before chaos erupted. The disc, seemingly of its own accord, emitted a blinding flash of light. The men screamed, clutching their heads as the room filled with an ear-splitting hum. Alex felt the same force from before, the pull, the connection, but this time it was stronger. The disc wasn't just a tool, it was protecting him. Taking advantage of the confusion, Alex grabbed Eli and bolted out the back door. The 2 men ran through narrow alleys, the sound of shouting and pounding footsteps close behind. The disc's hum seemed to guide them, turning them left and right until they emerged onto a crowded street. The agents didn't follow. They couldn't, not without drawing attention. Breathing heavily, Alex and Eli ducked into a subway station. As the train doors closed behind them, Alex finally allowed himself a moment to think. Whoever those men were, they weren't ordinary law enforcement. They had resources, coordination, and knowledge of the disk. But how? And what did they want with it? Eli broke the silence. That thing isn't just some alien trinket, Alex. It's a key. To what? I don't know, but those guys weren't here for a friendly chat. Alex nodded, his jaw tight. I need answers, and if they're willing to kill for this, it means I'm running out of time. Eli leaned back, his expression grim. Then we need to find someone who knows more than we do, and I think I know where to start. The subway ride was long and tense, filled with the unspoken weight of what had just happened. Alex and Eli sat in silence, their faces pale and drawn. The disc in Alex's bag seemed to pulse faintly, a subtle reminder of the chaos it had already caused. Whatever secrets it held, Alex knew they were dangerous. Dangerous enough for men with guns and black SUVs to hunt him down. When they finally arrived at their destination, Eli led the way to a nondescript brownstone in Queens. This guy, Eli said in a hushed voice, is off the grid. A real genius, but a bit paranoid. He knows about things like this, government cover-ups, alien tech, you name it. Alex followed, his bag slung tightly over his shoulder. The building's exterior was unremarkable, blending seamlessly with the quiet residential street. Eli knocked in a specific rhythm on the door, and after a tense moment, it creaked open to reveal a wiry man with thick glasses and an unkempt beard. Eli, the man said, his voice tinged with suspicion. What the hell are you doing here? Grant, we need your help, Eli said, stepping inside. It's big, like end of the world big. Grant's eyes flicked to Alex, then to the bag he was holding. Who's this, and what's in the bag? A friend, Eli replied quickly, and what's in the bag is something you need to see. Grant hesitated, then stepped aside to let them in. His apartment was a chaotic mess of wires, monitors, and papers covered in scribbled equations. The air smelled faintly of burnt circuits. All right, Grant said, crossing his arms. What's so important that you'd bring trouble to my doorstep? Alex placed the disc on a cluttered table, its glow casting eerie patterns across the room. Grant's skeptical expression shifted to one of awe as he leaned closer. What the hell is this? That's what we need to find out, Alex said. It's been communicating with me, showing me things, and now people are after it. They'll kill for it. Grant didn't respond immediately. He reached for a device, a handheld scanner of some kind, and began running it over the disk. The screen flickered with strange readings, symbols, and frequencies that Alex didn't understand. This isn't human, Grant said finally, his voice low. The energy signatures, they're off the charts. And these symbols, he pointed to the shifting patterns on the disk's surface. They're not random, they're a language. A language? Alex repeated, his heart pounding. Can you translate it? Grant shook his head. Not without more time. But I can tell you this much. Whatever this thing is, it's not just a message. It's a warning. Alex's stomach sank. A warning about what? Grant hesitated, his eyes scanning the readings on his device. I'm not sure, but the patterns, it's like they're tracking something. Or someone. Eli frowned. Tracking what? Grant looked up, his face pale. A presence, something big, and whatever it is, it's heading straight for Earth. The words hung in the air like a lead weight. Alex felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. He thought back to the visions, the stars, the galaxies, the dark shadow that loomed over everything. It wasn't just a metaphor. Something was coming. Before he could ask more questions, a sharp crack echoed outside, the sound of breaking glass. Grant froze, his eyes darting to the window. You brought them here, he whispered, his voice trembling. Eli moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. Black SUVs, same guys as before. Alex grabbed the disc, shoving it back into his bag. We have to go. Now. Grant shook his head. You don't get it. If they know about this place, they won't just take the disk. They'll erase everything, me included. Then come with us, Alex said. You're safer with us than staying here. Grant hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He began grabbing equipment, small devices and hard drives, stuffing them into a backpack. The three of them moved quickly, but the sound of footsteps on the stairs made Alex's heart race. They were out of time. This way, Grant hissed, leading them to a back door that opened into an alley. They slipped out just as the front door burst open, shouts echoing through the apartment. The alley was narrow and dark, the air thick with the stench of garbage. Alex could hear the agents inside, barking orders, tearing the apartment apart. "Where do we go now?" Eli whispered. Grant pointed to a fire escape leading to the roof. "Up. We can jump to the next building." They climbed quickly, the metal creaking under their weight. As they reached the rooftop, Alex glanced back. The agents had already spilled into the alley, their flashlights sweeping the darkness. One of them looked up, spotting Alex just as he pulled himself onto the roof. "There, on the roof," the agent shouted. Bullets pinged against the metal fire escape as Alex, Eli, and Grant sprinted across the rooftop. The gap to the next building was wider than Alex liked, but adrenaline left no room for hesitation. He leapt, landing hard on the other side. Eli and Grant followed, the latter barely making it across. The agents were close behind, but the trio kept moving, weaving between air conditioning units and vents. Finally, they found a stairwell that led down to the street. Emerging into the chaos of a busy intersection, they disappeared into the crowd. Breathless and shaken, they ducked into a dimly lit parking garage. Grant leaned against a concrete pillar, clutching his side. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, his voice hoarse. "If they're this desperate to get the disk, it's because they know what's coming." Alex nodded, pulling the disk from his bag. Its glow seemed stronger now, its symbols rearranging faster. He could feel it. Something was happening. Something that would change everything. "We need to figure out what this is," Alex said, "and we need to do it fast." Alex, Eli, and Grant sat huddled in a rundown motel room on the outskirts of the city. The blinds were drawn tight, the faint glow of the disk illuminating the room with an eerie light. The events of the past few days had left them bruised, exhausted, and on edge. The agents chasing them weren't ordinary government operatives. They were something else, something ruthless and relentless. Grant's laptop was open on the bed, lines of alien symbols scrolling across the screen as he worked tirelessly to decode the disk's messages. Eli sat by the window, peeking out every few minutes to check for any sign of pursuit. Alex, clutching the disk in his hands, felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The visions had grown more vivid, more terrifying. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just a threat to Earth, it was a threat to existence itself. Finally, Grant let out a sharp breath. "I've got something," he said, his voice trembling with both excitement and fear. Alex leaned over, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Grant pointed to the screen. "The disk. It's not just a warning. It's a failsafe. A last-ditch effort by whatever civilization created it to stop what's coming." Eli frowned. "What do you mean, stop what's coming? What is coming?" Grant hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the keyboard. "It's hard to describe. The closest analogy would be a predator, something that moves through the fabric of reality, consuming worlds, civilizations, entire galaxies. The disk calls it the Oblivion, and it's heading straight for us." Alex felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "How do we stop it?" Grant looked up, his expression grim. "That's the part I just translated. The disk is a key, but it's also a weapon. It can disrupt the Oblivion's path, force it to bypass our galaxy. But—" He trailed off, his eyes flicking nervously to Alex. "But what?" Alex pressed. Grant sighed. "The weapon requires a host, someone to interface with it, to activate it. The process is irreversible. Whoever does it won't survive." The room fell into a heavy silence. Alex stared at the disk in his hands, its glow pulsing softly, almost as if it were alive. The thought of sacrificing himself wasn't new. The visions had hinted at it, the messages had implied it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "There has to be another way," Eli said, his voice shaking. "We can't just accept this. There's always another way." Grant shook his head. "Not this time. This thing is coming, and it won't stop. If we don't act, Earth is as good as gone, and not just Earth, the entire galaxy." Alex closed his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The visions played through his mind again. The stars, the galaxies, the shadow. He'd been chosen for a reason, and now he understood why. The disk hadn't just picked him at random. It had seen something in him, something he couldn't even see in himself. "I'll do it," Alex said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. Eli shot up from his chair. "No, Alex, you can't." "I have to," Alex interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "If I don't, we're all dead. You said it yourself, Eli. There's no other way." Grant nodded solemnly, his hands trembling as he began typing. "I'll guide you through the process. Once it starts, there's no turning back." The room felt colder as Grant worked, the faint hum of the disk growing louder, more insistent. Alex sat cross-legged on the floor, holding the disk in his hands. Its symbols rearranged one final time, forming a pattern that seemed to glow with a sense of purpose. The hum resonated through his body, and Alex felt a strange calm wash over him. "Are you ready?" Grant asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded. "Do it." Grant pressed a key and the disk's glow intensified. The hum grew deafening, and the room was bathed in a blinding white light. Alex felt the energy of the disk surge through him, filling him with a warmth that was both comforting and overwhelming. Images flashed before his eyes, worlds he'd never seen, lives he'd never lived. He felt connected to everything, every star, every galaxy, every living being. And then he saw it, the oblivion. It was massive, a swirling vortex of darkness and destruction devouring everything in its path. Alex felt its hunger, its malice, its endless need to consume. But he also felt something else, its fear. The disk's energy was a force it couldn't comprehend, a light it couldn't extinguish. Alex raised the disk above his head, the energy building to a crescendo. He could feel his body breaking down, his mind unraveling. But he didn't stop. The oblivion loomed closer, its shadow stretching across the void. With one final surge of will, Alex unleashed the disk's power. The light exploded outward, brighter than anything Alex had ever seen. It consumed him, the room, the galaxy, everything. For a brief moment, there was nothing but light. And then, silence. When Eli and Grant opened their eyes, the room was dark. The disk was gone, and so was Alex. The hum had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness. Eli collapsed to his knees, his hands trembling. "He did it," Grant said, his voice hollow. "He stopped it." Eli stared at the spot where Alex had been, his chest heaving with suppressed sobs. "Yeah," he whispered, "but at what cost?" Outside, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The world carried on, oblivious to the sacrifice that had just saved it. Alex Carter was gone, but his choice had ensured that life would go on. For Earth, for the galaxy, for everything.